Steph, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Dee.
I am wanting to talk to you about a whole lot of stuff today, and you just let me know if there's anything we come across that you don't want to share with me or with the group. But I have been looking into your backstory. I've looked at you on the TikToks and on the Insta, and I'm fascinated by the journey you've been on, and I love it that you're open and prepared to share that with the community. I think it's great stuff. Before we get to that though, tell me about you, Steph. Tell me a little bit about your background, and stop short of 2 years ago. Like, tell us a Steph story leading up to that.
Leading up to the diagnosis?
Yeah.
I guess I was just someone who worked really hard. Had my own place, I had a partner, just the typical working job, come home to the family, I guess, family per se. And and then I kind of got very sick, and it kind of went downhill prior to a year coming up to my diagnosis, and there was a lot of medical issues. So down came the work, and down came the routine and the lifestyle. Because prior to that, working and being constantly motivated and having that lifestyle was a big part of my life for many years as a late teen. So yeah.
Steph, you were diagnosed quite early, I think, in life. You were 25 when you got the diagnosis that you are HIV positive.
Yeah.
I want to ask two questions in a row, see if you can answer them at once. I'm going to ask you two questions about that. What were your perceptions of HIV positive people before your diagnosis?
Mm-hmm.
And then tell me about your diagnosis, the day it happened, and what your perceptions of yourself were at that time.
Yeah, okay. So my perception of HIV, I knew nothing about. I think all I really knew were AIDS and how it kills people in the 80s and the 90s and the crisis that happened. And I'm a big Freddie Mercury fan, so when HIV was ever brought up, or if I ever listened to his music, I'd think about it, I'd reflect, I'd watch his movie, I'd love it because I love him. But that was quite literally as far as I knew regarding HIV. It was a very limited thing for me. It wasn't around me. I didn't know someone with it. I wasn't engaged in the community. It really had no significance in my life. So on the day when I got my diagnosis, it was a very big shock to me. As a lot of people would say, it really changed my life at a young age, you could call it. And I remember being told as well, because we were in lockdown, I came into the doctors and I wasn't really allowed to have anyone with me. So it was kind of like okay, why am I being called in lockdown? We're not really supposed to go in. So obviously it's something serious. And then I sat down and my doctor had told me that everything came back clear in terms of STIs, STDs, except for HIV. And I remember sitting there, and now that I look back at it, the first thing that really came to my mind was like Freddie Mercury, like AIDS. So like I can look back at it now and kind of giggle at it, because that was quite literally the first thing I asked my doctor. But it was the most emotional thing and life-changing thing I'd ever been through. But also I got an answer for so long that I'd been waiting with all these medical problems and not knowing what was what, and all these things affecting my lifestyle. So yeah.
It's interesting, Steph, because many of the women I've talked to, and I've spoken to a lot of HIV positive women recently, many of them are diagnosed. A lot of them didn't even present with anything. They weren't being tested, or it was a routine blood test, or they were pregnant and so they had to get their bloods taken anyway. But it's interesting that you got to experience physical symptoms and concerns over your health.
Yeah,
Can you tell us about, do you know how you contracted the HIV? And do you
I
mind
do.
sharing?
Yeah, sure. So I was with a ex-partner at the time, and he was quite unwell, and it was kind of like he had to um get all these bloods done and find out a few things for himself and the new jobs he was doing. It was just kind of like a protocol, I guess you could call it. And then he became a little bit unwell, and then he ended up getting STI, STD, full check, the whole deal. And he come back positive with syphilis. And at the time, him and I were still living together, but our relationship had died away. And so I was like, well, even though I haven't slept with him in a little while, I'm just going to do it for, just in case. You never know what could pop up. Um, so I got a full test done, and I come back HIV positive from him.
And I'm so sorry that you had to go through that at all, but certainly alone during lockdown. So many people, I think it's given us all a perspective of healthcare in our country, that if you have to go through that system alone and by yourself, like quite physically, that's really challenging.
Yeah.
You talk about hiding in your first year since diagnosis, that you didn't want to, that you were detectable at that point and presumably infectious at that point, and you didn't want to share that information with anybody.
Yeah.
What happened after that? What was the turning point, and what did you need to change to become the advocate that you now are?
It's funny because there's no process and journey for it written down to follow. Everyone finds their own way or their own path with it. And I don't think there was anything significant that really was like, you know what, I'm going to come out public about this and I'm going to do something. I feel like the only thing that really got to me is I was finding my identity through the trauma that I'd gone through my diagnosis and how to cope. And I engaged a lot more in the queer community, the LGBTQ plus, all that kind of stuff, because that's how I felt comfortable. And that was really comforting for me post-diagnosis, within that year. And I started watching Drag Race, and there were a few episodes that really got to me because, there'd be certain drag queens coming out publicly on a TV show about having HIV. And it really, to this day, it makes me really emotional because, I feel like it was them that really gave me that push of, hey, I could really do something. The fact that they're on TV right now, changing how I'm feeling, I could do that for someone else in a different aspect.
It's really interesting, Steph. You've mentioned Freddie Mercury and a couple of queens off Drag Race, and they're you see it and then you can be it. You see somebody doing well. I know that we lost our dear Freddie to complications of HIV, but he lived a life, and you saw that and you took comfort in that. And I think what you're doing, certainly from what I've seen, is that you're being that for people, and that's got to be empowering for you.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. Even the first week of coming out public, I had people, the amount of love I received was absolutely overwhelming. And from people all over the world that would send me a message on Instagram just saying, hey, thank you for doing this. This is so brave of you. I feel like I have someone. And I think a lot of that came down to how young I was as well, that, when you hear of HIV, you think of the older generation because that's when it started. But having someone in a younger generation that you may feel like you can come to a little bit easier. I know I can relate to that, if I can be that person, I will certainly try to be.
It's interesting, Steph, that you said that you've formed a community within the LGBTQIA plus community, which I love. Thank you for joining. But it's really interesting because I've spoken to women who are HIV positive and asked them about what the intersectionality is between the HIV positive community and the queer community, because the queer community has such a wealth of experience in care and in knowledge, and it's such a great asset. And these other women I spoke to said, no, we're not that AIDS, we're not that HIV, that's the gay one kind of thing. And I think that's really interesting because the LGBTQIA plus community can offer so much love and support to all the positive women, all the positive people.
Yeah.
So maybe that's your branch of advocacy. Like, how do you think that you could build on your knowledge of the HIV positive women community and the queer community?
I mean, I'm not too sure. That's my comfortability, you know, because I do identify as queer, and having those people around me in general. And to me, in my own personal experiences, I find that they are more accepting of my status, whether it be a sexual partner or whether it be a friend or whether it be anything beyond that. You know, there's a lot more acceptance there, where when I was dating men, that it was a lot harder for me to find that comfortability and have that confidence. So I feel like I've just naturally found that route to kind of steer that way in terms of acceptance within my own journey, if that makes sense.
It totally does. In your Insta account, Steph, in your Insta account, you talk a lot about common misconceptions and you debunk them in a very powerful way. And I recommend anybody goes to Steph's account to have a look at how she does it. It's not through speeches and it's not through, lecturing people. It's often unspoken. It's often you using your emotion, writing on your own face, things that are slung at you. It's very cleverly done. And I really enjoyed watching it. But what do you think are the top three misconceptions about people living with HIV that you are constantly having to address?
Top three things I would have to say is people think I will live a really short life. So there's a constant fear of like she's gonna die or they're gonna die. Second thing is I don't want to sleep with that person because I'm gonna get HIV, no matter if you're undetectable, no matter where you are on that spectrum of HIV. That is probably the number one thing that people fear. When it comes to being in company of someone who has HIV. You know, I've even had people, when I've told them, standing next to them, literally take a step back from me, you know, because it's like the air I breathe is bad, you know. So I feel like that there is probably the number one that gets me more on a daily basis, if I were to be in that kind of environment. But but between those two, it's definitely big, and that just ties in with so many things.
I've always thought it was interesting because I've been working in this space a little while, and the U equals U message is undeniably true, and it's backed by science and medical evidence, and there's a lot of people who live by it, and I'll have you explain it shortly. But I wonder if the message is not getting through and why. Can you explain to us what U equals U means,
Yeah.
and how do we get that message out more clearly?
So U equals U is undetectable equals untransmittable. If my CD4 count, my viral load is at a certain number, I cannot sexually transmit the virus. It stays dormant, it stays hidden, it stays healthy. As long as I keep taking my treatment, it'll stay that way. I've experienced a few situations where medical professionals don't understand it. I've experienced going for a tattoo and being denied due to being HIV, you know, positive, but being undetectable. There's still a world out there, no matter if it's a friend, no matter if it's a medical professional, no matter if it's a workplace, that still don't see U equals U. You know, I recommend anyone who doesn't know someone on HIV or does to at least look into that and just be aware that that is something that exists and that is something that is real.
Let's talk about disclosing status for a minute. And I know that you talked about in that first year after diagnosis, you were not sure, not comfortable disclosing, and you weren't sure how to go about it.
Yeah.
Clearly now you are. How do you go about that? And not just sexual partners, but friends and colleagues and whatever. What's the steps for you in deciding whether to trust somebody enough to disclose, and how do you generally do it?
I think at the start I wasn't too sure how to go about it. So if I were to explain early days of my diagnosis, the first people I disclosed my status to was they were aware that I was unwell for quite some time and everyone was itching for an answer. So while we were in lockdown, I FaceTimed them, every single one of them, my cousins, my aunties, my uncles, and it was very hard because I couldn't hug them. You know, there wasn't a sense of comfort there, but it was also a process of healing for me. I found actually talking about it to people that I cared about helped me as well in the process. So going from that to telling really close friends over time, to telling the workplace that I'd worked at over time, you know, any way that I found it would benefit me, without coming across selfish, of course, but you know, I had to do it for my health because it affected my work. It affected me leaving the house sometimes, you know, to go see friends, and they don't understand why I'm not there. You know, it's things that I needed to say for myself, and over time I grew the strength to do so. And going from that to coming out public, I did gain a lot of love. And so it's kind of it's just always there. I feel like if people were to find me on social media, that is what they will see. It's on my Facebook, it's on my Instagram, it's on my TikTok. You know, I have no shame with it there, and they will know even prior before I tell them. Like even on my Tinder, I've got HIV advocate, you know, activist as well. So it's there, you know, and what they do with that is on them, but the burden is off me, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's a really good way of explaining how it is. You say, well, here it is, and you deal with that. I don't need to be holding your hand through that process.
It
Speaking
did
to
take me a
people,
while though to get to that like confidence. Like I went through sexual partners that turned me down. I lost friends, I've lost family members, I've lost close people to me as well, you know, that won't accept my status. And over time I just had to grow a thick skin to where I am today. So yeah, bit of both.
Steph, speaking to people now who might be recently diagnosed or concerned about a diagnosis or worried about people that they love, is there anything, Steph, in your life that you want to do that you cannot do due to your status?
I'm going to say no. I don't think there is. The only thing I legally can't do is give blood for obvious reasons. But other than that, it's a matter of going through your process and entering it in your own time gently. You know, if you want to go out and see the world, you can do that. You know, it just don't throw yourself in the deep end. You know, give yourself time to heal when it comes to this kind of stuff, and baby steps.
Steph, I think you're amazing. What's the one thing that you want? If somebody dropped $1 million on you right now and said, do something that will get this message out there, can you think of anything more powerful you could do than what you're already doing? That's the thing I think.
Oof.
It's the social media stuff. Like you're not going to let it drop everybody, and you're not going to buy time on telly. It's this, if somebody wants to find a positive person, pardon the pun, somebody who's a positive of spirit who's living with HIV.
Yeah.
I just think once you get into, because you were a gateway for me to get into a whole lot of TikToks and Instas of people living with HIV. And it's amazing. If you get in there, the positivity is incredible. So I don't think money's the answer. I've answered my own question. See, look what I did. That's a great skill for an interviewer. But really, if somebody gave you $1 million, what would you do to help this cause?
I'd donate it to places that wouldn't be able to afford treatment overseas. I don't feel like it'd be relating in an advocacy way. I do what I can, and it still reaches around the world. And it's weird when you really hear yourself say that, because you don't realize it till it happens when you get those messages. I've talked to people in California and done interviews with them, and they've been living with HIV for over 30 years, you know, and even that there in itself blows your mind. But money isn't the answer, it's communication. It's how you advocate, and having social media in this day and age is the way to do it. So money doesn't cost it, you know, the money can go towards people overseas that need treatment and can't afford it. You can take it.
Maybe a new cat scratching pole for the pussycat there.
Oh yeah, maybe a few things for me too.
Steph, I cannot thank you enough for spending time with us today. Go well, and I'm so happy to have met you and to see that you're thriving.
Thank you so much, Dee.